This network brought together activists, business leaders, policy makers and everyday citizens in its inaugural India Climate Summit to address the impact of climate change. These distinguished voices have championed the cause of climate action. They have been raising awareness and protecting the future of our planet. The summit brought forth its commitment to foster a sustainable nation, uniting stakeholders in a common agenda. India Climate Summit saw distinguished expert Vandana Shiva, environmentalist and managing trustee Navdanya Trust, to ponder on the importance of ecological agriculture in manifesting sustainable development.
The United Nations is telling us that by 2050, the world's population will be up to 10 billion people. Will we have enough food to feed everyone? Because from what we are producing right now, that will mean that we'll have to produce about 60 to 70% more food. Given the fact there is scarcity of land, given the fact there is scarcity of water, energy, and then there is climate change, will we be in a position to grow this much food? And where will this food grow?
Well, we will be in a position to feed not just human beings, but all beings, because every being must eat. People forget that. The birds must eat, the earthworm must eat, the mycorrhizal fungi must get its food. If instead of degenerating the capacity of this earth to produce food, we regenerate it, in the kind of work we do in Navdanya. When I say degenerate, what do I mean? 75% of the soil and water has been destroyed by an industrial model of agriculture. An industrial model of agriculture is based on fossil chemicals. You know, fossil chemicals are based on fossil fuels. 1 kilogram of urea requires 2 liters of diesel equivalent. And then it has massive externalities, destroying the water, emitting the most serious greenhouse gas, which somehow no one talks about. Nitrous oxide is 300 times more damaging to the environment and to climate than carbon dioxide. Soil organisms die, you know. We work with the soil, we work with soil organisms. You just put urea on an earthworm and see what happens to it. Apply it to fungi, they won't live. It's a toxic substance. 93% of the biodiversity of this planet has been destroyed, either by monocultures of an industrial system or by chemicals whose objective is only one, to kill life. Insecticides kill insects, so no wonder 80% insects are gone. Herbicides destroy everything green, no wonder biodiversity of plants goes. Fungicides designed to destroy the most important element of life, the fungi in the soil, the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. But most significant is the connection between an industrial model of farming based on fossil chemicals and greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. I wrote a book in the lead up to climate summit at Copenhagen called Soil Not Oil. And I worked out then that about 45% emissions come from an industrial food system. That data has been updated since then, and it's about 54%. 14% from production, which is the only figure usually mentioned. No one talks about the destruction of forests for a globalized system in which you're not growing food, you're growing commodities. 90% of the corn, GMO corn and soya, goes for biofuel and animal feed. It's not feeding people. Another 20% comes from over-processing food that makes us sick. It uses energy. Transporting it thousands of miles, packaging it. You know, I've done a rough archaeological analysis of the waste we are creating everywhere. Just go through the packaging. 75% is either plastic in which you brought the vegetable home or packaging of the food. And 4% is wasted. So 50% of our climate problem is an industrial model. And yet, on the other hand, when we shift to ecology, we regenerate soil. I would give you the data on how our mycorrhizal fungi are 3,600% more just by taking care of the soil. Our water levels on our farm, I hope some of you will visit the Earth University at Navdanya. Our water levels have risen 70 feet since we started because we are recharging more. We are holding more. Our biodiversity has increased. We have 6 times more pollinators on the farm than in the forest next door. We are next to the Rajajiv Sanctuary. And of course, the biodiversity solution, you can pull down more carbon dioxide than we are emitting through the plants which have an amazing technology, which somehow we keep forgetting, the technology of photosynthesis, of taking the sun's light with photosynthesis, absorbing the carbon dioxide, converting it into the food we eat and the oxygen we breathe. There is no technology like that in the world.
So are you telling me that to prepare for the future, we have to look at the past?
Well, if you think life is past and death is the future, go ahead. But life is forever. Ecosystems must work forever. Ecological principles are the iron principles. You cannot violate them without having climate change and biodiversity destruction, or in one day of the rain, a flooding in Delhi. That's not climate change. That's you didn't clean your drains. So we're mixing up everything, and we've created a very, very convenient thing that no matter what problem we created, we just say climate. And we are defining climate as a cause when it's a consequence of forgetting that there's a living earth, and the living earth has regulations, and this planet used to be 270 degrees centigrade, and the earth with her photosynthesis reduced it to 13 degrees and made it habitable for us. It has been 98% CO2, reduced it to 0.03%. It's gone up to 0.04. But we are forgetting that the earth is living. हम धरती माँ कहते हैं इसको, हम भूमि कहते हैं इसको, Mother Earth. But we've turned it into a dead earth, and then we think we can do what we want to with it.
But climate change is a reality for India's agriculture, for India's food growers. In your experience, how is it changing the way we grow food, and in the future, how we will consume food?
Yeah. I call it climate havoc. When I say climate havoc and climate chaos, it means you don't know, A, what the extreme event will be when. So now, in the Middle East, you get flooding. That's
Absolutely.
So it's climate havoc. Climate change means, array, temperature 1 degree ho jayega, 2 degree ho jayega, 5 degree ho jayega. And there's a lulling effect. Change is lulling. Disrupting, I've done a new book called Nature of Nature on climate change and food. And the subtitle is the metabolic disorder of climate change. Because if the earth is living, just like when we eat junk food, we get metabolic disorders. Our diabetes, our cancers, our BP, everything is a metabolic. Climate change is a metabolic disorder of a living system called Gaia. We messed it up. And the messing up, we've destroyed the biosphere, we've abused the soil. We have forgotten that we have to give back. We have to give back in gratitude. Yes, there's a problem. We live with it. In our Garhwal, we had the 2013 disaster. 2 years ago, we had the 21, we had the Rishi Gangaga disaster in the Bay of Bengal, which is the most severely impacted. Began with the Orissa super cyclone. Every year, there are 1 or 2 cyclones.
True.
So how do we deal with, you talked about cropping patterns. You've got to distribute and evolve through farmers' participation, resilient seeds. So we have developed, I've created 150 community seed banks. So in the coastal areas, people have their salt-tolerant and flood-tolerant seeds, and they can go to it. And our Orissa farmers supplied 2 truckloads of salt-tolerant seeds when the tsunami happened in Tamil Nadu. Or in the, you can't say dry areas anymore because you don't know where the drought will hit. But we exaggerate some issue like this year's heat wave. We revived the millets 35 years ago. But our millets are doing fine. because they're designed for lack of water and strong heat. So our bajri is thriving. The ragi and mandua do fine in drought and in extreme rain. So cropping patterns must be diverse. And India is the land of the richest diversity in the world in terms of crops. There is no other place that has so much diversity, and we must regenerate it. The second is we must decentralize, because my ecology teaches me that the more centralized and uniform a system is, the more vulnerable to collapse and vulnerability it is. The more diverse and decentralized it is, the more it can bounce back. That's resilience.
So what are you saying? That smaller farmers in this country need to thrive? I'm asking you this question because 70% of our farmers have very, very small land holdings. Forget Africa. Africa, I think, has the lowest, but we have very small land holdings. For most of them, agriculture is not even viable anymore, given that there are no returns on investment. So are you saying that you need to keep these small farmers engaged in what they are doing?
I'm not saying it. The farmers are saying it. We want to be annadatas. This country is fed by its small farmers. We have never allowed large concentration of land holdings. Every time it was attempted, the farmers defended their right to land. Around the world, you must have seen from January onwards, there are farmers' protests everywhere. Farmers want to be farmers. Farmers want to grow food and feed the world. 80% of the food today comes from small farms. That's FAO data. 20% is the leftovers after biofuel and animal feed has taken the green. So small farms, from all the scientific data, shows they produce more because they use energy and resources more effectively. As our former Prime Minister Charan Singh said, if I have 100 acres, I will not give it to one farmer who will treat it carelessly. I will give it to 20 farmers who will treat their land with care, and through care, they will grow more food.
But can the small farmer bear the cost of climate change?
If they are, the point is the cost factor is a result of abandoning them. If you, make sure that if they have suffered an unnecessary flood, public systems should be there in their support. Not the torturous insurance schemes which are ripping them off right now, if you look at it.
I want to ask you what you see as the future of meat, because we are told meat is not good for the planet. We are also told that because if you grow more cattle, if there are more cows, it means more deforestation. Across the globe, 6.7 million hectares of forests are being cut because land is needed for cows to graze. Where do you stand on this? What do you see as the future of meat?
Yeah. So, the Amazon being chopped for animal feed, like soya bean, is a very recent phenomenon. It's a result of globalization. But we forget that there are some places in the world that have adequate water for cultivation of crops, because you need both fertile soil and water. Most of the world is too dry for agricultural cultivation. And so most of the land of the world is used by pastoralists. Take all of Mongolia, it's pastoralist. Take Rajasthan, it's a pastoral economy. All of the sub-Saharan Africa, pastoral. Look at the Maasai, pastoral. So what's happening is, one of the problems with the Western mind that I have resisted ever since I started studying my physics is it's a mechanistic reductionist mind that equates things that are different. So they take pastoralism, equate it to factory farming, but factory farming and pastoralism are different. In pastoralism, the animals graze and distribute their load. In factory farming, animals are fed the grain that's taken away from human beings. And from there comes pollution. Factory farms cause pollution. Pastoralism regenerates the earth. And we mustn't forget that we are the land where we hold the cow as sacred, not for nothing, because the cow gives us soil fertility. The cow gives us animal energy. When the climate summit, when the climate treaty was being written in 1992, I remember our minister, I was working at that time with the ministers, we showed how we were 90% renewable energy, and only 10% fossil energy. Well, a lot of that renewable energy was animals. Animals are energy. Take a fossil fuel-driven tractor or big machine, or the big machines that harvest grain in the Amazon, to the beautiful renewal of the earth, because our animal plows don't plow deeper than that. So the ecological impacts and difference are very important. And then he goes on to say, cows are a problem because they have 4 stomachs. They have 4 stomachs because they graze roughage. He says the 4 stomachs are the problem, and I'm going to re-engineer the cow. One of the big confusions in this whole debate is they've forgotten that any animal, it could be a wild animal, it could be a deer, or it could be a cow. When they're grazing, they're part of the biogenic cycle. A biogenic cycle has a cow which emits a little bit of methane, which becomes carbon dioxide, turns back into the grass. 10-year cycle. 10-year cycle. It's not a permanent greenhouse gas. And yet, when you create the kind of waste that we have in Delhi, the mountains of waste, that methane has no reabsorption. So we've forgotten cycles, and we've forgotten 2 lessons from nature. Nature has no waste and causes no pollution, and nature doesn't extract, nature recycles. And ecological farming is about 2 principles which we cannot avoid. I think you should stop using the term past and future. We should use the term permanence. What are the 2 cycles that are permanent? One is the cycle of nutrition. The food moves. The principle of diversity. And of course, with that diversity, the recycling.
Since you've studied food so closely, you've studied the environment so closely, how's the health of the planet linked to our health, your health and my health?
Well, one reason I'm dedicated to looking at food and agriculture and biodiversity is I'm trained in quantum theory. I did a PhD on non-locality in quantum theory. I'm looking at this because I watched Punjab in '84. I watched Bhopal in '84. And I said, why is there so much death? So I started to address that question. How is our health and the health of the planet one health? Because we are part of the earth. We've been made to think we are separate, but we're part of the earth. The same Panchamahabhutas make us and make the earth. Every harm we do to the earth, every harm we do to create climate change, is a harm we cause to ourselves by either destroying food availability in terms of absolute production, or eating bad food and toxics. Let me just give you 2 figures. I gave you the figure of 50% emissions from an industrial food system. 75% diseases today, chronic diseases, come from food, ultra-processed and chemical food. 75%. And this will grow if we do not build the ecological systems that bring fairness to the earth, fairness to the farmer, and fairness to the eater. All 3 are connected. So every time we use a toxic chemical, we push a bird to extinction, we push insects to extinction, we push soil organisms or microorganisms to extinction, but we also destroy our gut microbiome. Our gut microbiome and the soil microbiome is one. And they work on the same principles of diversity. The real doctors are understanding that all the chronic diseases are metabolic disorders of destroying our gut microbiome. And so the Earth's microbiome and the gut microbiome have total harmony. And we've got to go to the principles of what creates balance and harmony in systems. We have to start looking at systems as interconnected systems, not fragmented, not separated. We are separating the biosphere from the climate, and that's making a mess because the people like Gates are waiting for opportunities. He's geoengineering the planet. The last speaker talked about the Sami. I helped the Sami fight a Gates project on geoengineering in northern Sweden. Of course, genetically engineering the cow, he's desperate to genetically engineer the cow. And he's not happy with real food because real food circulates from the soil to the plants to us. So whatever is good for the earth is good for us, and that should be the measure. The earth should be the measure of living a good life.
Actually, very well said. A couple of more questions then, Vandana ji. The counter argument to what you've just said will be, a lot of people here will turn back to you and say, but hum processed food kahan khate hain? As a culture and as a people, where are we consuming processed food?
Hum processed food khate nahi the till 2005, when they changed our food safety laws from PFA to the FSSAI Act, the Food Safety and Standards Act, which was drafted by the Cokes and the Pepsis, whom we were dealing with at that time. Just read a study that the biggest market for Nestle, for Maggi, is India. We are a Maggi nation. We are a junk food nation. Gaon pe pahunch jao, remote ilakon mein pahunch jao. And that is something we must avoid, also because it destroys livelihoods. You see, the industrial processing doesn't create livelihoods. We used to have processing of food reserved for the small scale and cottage industry sector till globalization. So papads and pickles used to come from small women's groups. Then they put the burden of the FSSAI, where in the tiniest little bottle you have to measure kitna tel, kitna saunf, kitna yam. No woman can do it. Our artisanal food industry disappeared. This year I've taken a commitment. We're going to build back the livelihoods of women to create the healthy food you're talking about, because that's our culture.
Vandana ji, always such a pleasure to hear you speak and get your perspective on things. Thank you very much for joining us here on the India Climate Summit. It was really an honor. Thank you.